It was supposed to be a night of elegance and escape. Just one evening of glittering masks, laughter, and the illusion of youth revived. That was how Olivia had pitched it to her husband, Mark, who had reluctantly agreed after weeks of persuasion. A masquerade ball at an old manor on the outskirts of town. It was an annual event, she said, held for decades by a private organization with roots dating back to the 1800s. Exclusive, elusive, and always full of mystery. The invitation had arrived in a thick cream envelope, sealed with dark red wax and adorned with a crest of a black raven. No return address, no contact information, just a location, date, and a line in ornate cursive. You are cordially invited to vanish among the faces. That line stuck with Mark more than Olivia ever knew. The manor was unlike anything they'd seen before. Towering, ivy-covered walls loomed in the moonlight. The gravel path, crunching under the tires of their car, felt like entering another century. Valets in matching Venetian masks guided guests into the grand entrance with silent gestures. Everyone was in costume, not just elegant, exquisite. Mark felt underdressed despite the expensive black mask Olivia had picked for him. Inside, chandeliers bathed the hall in golden light. Music, live, baroque, and haunting, floated from an unseen quartet. The guests danced in slow circles, masks concealing expressions yet somehow revealing more than they hid. Olivia was enchanted. Mark was not. He couldn't explain it, but something about the way people moved, the way the staff watched them too closely, unsettled him. He whispered this to Olivia, who laughed it off. They were assigned a number upon entry, not a name, not a guest card, a number, 47 and 48. Just part of the experience. The hostess had smiled through her gilded owl mask. Still, it felt more like a processing line than a party. As they mingled, Mark noticed a peculiar pattern. No one ever took off their masks, not even to sip champagne, and some guests, he was sure they hadn't moved from their spots since they'd arrived. A man in a jester's mask stood by the fireplace, unmoving, staring through slits that didn't seem to blink. A woman in a crimson lace mask had smiled at Olivia at least 3 times, but had never changed her expression. Mark grew increasingly anxious, and Olivia began to notice. "Let's just dance, Mark, please. We came to feel alive again." So they danced. Slowly, stiffly at first, but then the music seemed to seep into their bones. Mark forgot his unease for a moment. Olivia smiled, vibrant under her silver peacock mask. But when the dance ended, the music did not stop. It abruptly shifted, dissonant, off-key. The chandeliers flickered, and then came the sound that truly shattered the illusion. A scream, brief, distant, muffled. The guest did not react, not one flinch. Olivia froze. Mark turned his head. No one else seemed to hear it. Or worse, they did and didn't care. He whispered, "Did you hear that?" Olivia nodded slowly. "It came from upstairs." Mark looked around. No staircases were visible. No doors marked private. Just gilded walls and faceless mask. Curiosity, or concern, drove them to explore. They slipped away through an archway, following where they thought the sound had come from. The further they went, the quieter it became. No music, no laughter, just the echo of their own footsteps and the faint creak of old wood. The hallways were lined with portraits, all masked figures. No eyes visible, no names. Eventually, they reached a door, black, unmarked, and slightly ajar. Mark pushed it open. Inside was a room far colder than the rest of the manor, a circular space. Stone-walled, with a single chair in the center and a mask on the floor, a broken one, split down the middle. Olivia stepped back. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. But it was too late. A presence was behind them, a voice, soft, polite, cut through the silence. "Guests are not permitted in this wing." They turned to find a tall man in a bone-white mask, smooth and expressionless, standing in the doorway, his gloved hands folded calmly. "Your numbers are being missed downstairs." Olivia tried to speak, but her voice failed. Mark forced a smile. "Sorry, we got lost." The masked man tilted his head slowly. "Then let me guide you back. No one likes when guests go missing." His tone didn't change, but something in it sent a chill down their spines. As they returned to the ballroom, Mark glanced back. The mask on the floor was gone. Back in the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed. The music was darker now, almost droning. Guests moved slower, in sync, like puppets. Olivia clutched Mark's hand tightly. "I don't want to stay anymore," she whispered. They began moving toward the exit, but couldn't find it. The entrance they'd walked through was gone, replaced by a wall of mirrors. Mark approached one. His reflection wasn't his own. The mask was the same, but the eyes staring back were older, tired, hollow. He looked to Olivia. "Something's wrong. We have to get out." Then, from behind them, the same polite voice. "It's time for the unmasking." Everyone froze. A large clock chimed midnight. One by one, guests turned to face the center of the room. A masked figure stood atop the balcony above. "Tonight," they proclaimed, "we reveal our truest faces." With a single gesture, they removed their mask, and beneath it was nothing. No face, just skin stretched tight where features should be. Gasps, then silence. Mark turned to Olivia. "We have to go, now." But she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were locked on her own reflection. Her hands moved, slowly lifting her mask. "Olivia, no!" he shouted. But she pulled it off and screamed. Her face, it was still there, but something was wrong. Her eyes were wide, dilated. Her skin seemed paler, thinner, like she'd aged 10 years in a second. She dropped the mask and began backing away. "Mark, it's like it took something from me." Then came the others. Guests removing masks, revealing hollowed versions of themselves. Gaunt, lifeless, empty. One by one, the room filled with gasps, screams, sobs, and laughter. From above, the faceless figure spoke again. "Every mask reveals. Every mask consumes." Mark grabbed Olivia's hand and ran. They pushed through the crowd of withering faces, down hallways that twisted in impossible ways. Doors led to brick walls. Stairs looped back to the same floor. The manor had become a maze, shifting, alive. Eventually, they found a narrow service corridor. A sliver of moonlight shone from a small, high window. They climbed, desperate, silent. When they burst into the cold night, they didn't stop running, not even when they reached their car, not even when the manor disappeared behind them. They never spoke of it to anyone. They destroyed the invitation. But sometimes, late at night, Olivia would stand before the mirror and touch her face. and whisper, "Do you think it's still taking from me?" It began with an envelope, cream-coloured, thick and sealed with deep red wax. The emblem pressed into it was an ornate mask, one eye open, one shut. Martin Halbrook, a 47-year-old architect with a habit of overthinking, found the invitation on his kitchen counter one rainy Thursday evening. He lived alone in a modest 2-story house just outside Boston. There were no fingerprints on the envelope, no postage stamp. It hadn't come through the mail. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting the elegant calligraphy that spelled out his full name. Inside was a single card, black with gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to an exclusive masquerade. Midnight, March 9th, Hawthorne Estate. Wear a mask. Leave your name behind." The instructions were clear and chilling in their precision. He hadn't heard from anyone in months, not since the divorce. For hours, he debated attending. The card had no RSVP, no phone number, just a place and a time. Curiosity slowly overpowered his caution. Something in him, perhaps loneliness, or that quiet desperation that creeps in after too many silent dinners, drove him to choose a mask and suit. He didn't even remember falling asleep, but when he woke, it was already late, almost midnight. The drive to Hawthorne Estate took nearly an hour. Fog clung to the forest road like it had been painted on, refusing to part even when Martin switched to high beams. The estate itself stood like something out of a Gothic novel. Stone towers, iron gates, and windows that seemed to watch. A valet approached as soon as he parked, wearing a porcelain white mask with a permanent smile. Martin stepped out, clutching his own mask, a simple black half mask he'd dug out of a Halloween box in the attic. As he handed over his keys, he felt the first twinge of unease. Music drifted from inside. Soft, classical, but slightly distorted, like an old record warping on a turntable. He hesitated at the door before pushing it open. Inside, he was greeted by an attendant in a Venetian jester mask. "Leave your name," the figure said, offering him a ledger. Martin stared at the blank pages. Others had signed, but only with initials, symbols, or phrases. No names. He hesitated, then simply drew a small X and moved on. Inside, it was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a polished black and white checkered floor. Dozens of guests, all masked, moved in elegant chaos like a choreographed hallucination. Some danced, others stood still, whispering into each other's ears with urgent secrecy. Everyone wore elaborate masks, gold leaf, feathers, horns, some grotesque and twisted. Martin moved through them like a ghost, nodding politely, unsure of who anyone was. Waiters offered wine, but their trays trembled as if they were afraid. When he asked for the host, no one answered. Some guests turned their heads sharply at his voice but said nothing. A woman in a red dress brushed past him, her mask a smooth, featureless oval. He noticed details that unsettled him. One man stood perfectly still, wineglass at his lips, not blinking. A group laughed too loudly at something inaudible, their mirth mechanical, and the mirrors, too many, lining every wall, seemed slightly delayed, showing actions just a fraction too late. When Martin waved at one, it didn't wave back. Wandering from the ballroom, Martin found himself in a narrow hallway lined with mirrors. Each one distorted his reflection, his eyes too wide, his mouth stretched. his mask turning downward. He could hear whispers echoing off the marble walls, though he was completely alone. The words were unintelligible, but filled with urgency. He turned around, but the entrance was gone. A cold draft ran through the hall. Then came the clicking of heels. Slow, deliberate, approaching. He called out, "Who's there?" No reply. Only the tapping sound getting closer. A tall figure in a plague doctor mask appeared from the shadows. It simply stared at him, then, wordlessly, pointed toward a door that hadn't been there before. Inside the room was a small stage, lit by a single spotlight. An old man was kneeling, muttering to himself, surrounded by shattered porcelain masks. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "Don't let them take your face," he croaked. Martin took a step back, but the door behind him had vanished. Martin descended stone stairs into darkness. The air was damp and old, filled with the smell of wet stone and something metallic. Flickering candlelight revealed a circle of masked guests, standing silently around a figure tied to a chair. The figure was sobbing, wearing no mask, their face pale with terror. Martin recognized him. It was Harold Dempsey, his old college roommate. They hadn't spoken in 20 years. "Why am I here?" Martin asked aloud, voice cracking. No one answered. The guests began to hum, a low droning sound that seemed to shake the very walls. Dempsey screamed something unintelligible, and suddenly, all the masked guests looked at Martin. One guest stepped forward, placing a hand on Martin's shoulder. "You left your name behind. Now you see the cost of identity." The guests began removing their masks one by one. Underneath, their faces were smooth. No eyes, no mouths, just blank skin, stretched over bone. Martin tried to look away but found he couldn't move. Dempsey's face was melting, his skin dripping like wax. "Help me!" he screamed, but Martin was frozen. Martin turned and ran. Through winding halls that didn't match the building's layout, doors leading to nowhere, and staircases that looped back to the same place. Every mirror showed a different version of himself, older, bloodied, grinning, or crying. Panic clawed at his chest. He stumbled into the ballroom again, but it was empty now. The chandeliers had gone dark. The checkered floor was covered in dirt and blood. His mask had fused to his face. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The woman in the red dress appeared again. This time her face split into a monstrous grin. She leaned in close and whispered, "You wore the mask too well. Now you never take it off." Then the room exploded with sound. Violins screeching, glass shattering, the chandeliers crashing to the ground. Martin dropped to his knees, covering his ears. He could feel something pushing against his skull from inside, like his mind was being hollowed out. He saw flashes, memories that weren't his, faces he didn't recognize, and always that whisper, "Who are you without your mask?" Martin woke in his bed. The rain was still falling. He ran to the mirror. No mask, just his face, pale, tired, shaken. He checked his phone. March 10th. Was it a dream? He raced to the car. It was parked in the driveway, dirty but untouched. The Halloween box in the attic was gone. He tried calling Harold. The number had been disconnected. He searched for news. Nothing about Hawthorne Estate. No records. As if it never existed. Then he saw it. On the kitchen counter. Another envelope. Same cream paper. Same red wax. But this time, it was already open. Inside was a mirror, small, round. The reflection was not his. They said the mansion had been empty for decades, a stone colossus perched just on the edge of the cliffside, overlooking the Atlantic, like a sentinel of the forgotten past. No one in town ever spoke of it, not directly. Whispers, glances, unfinished sentences. That was all the old Whitmore estate ever got. So when the invitations began arriving, the town's silence felt like it cracked just a little. They were elegant, black envelopes sealed with red wax, bearing only the initials WM. Henry Lawton, a 45-year-old insurance broker with a skeptical mind and a fondness for history, received his on a rainy Thursday morning. At first he laughed, assuming it was an elaborate marketing stunt. But as he turned the envelope in his hands and felt the rough texture of the seal, something shifted in his gut. The invitation was handwritten, inked in a script far too ornate to be from a local. You are cordially invited to the masquerade ball at the Whitmore mansion. One night only. Costumes required. Midnight. He mentioned it to his neighbour, old Mrs. Dalloway, who paled when she heard the name. That place isn't meant for the living, she whispered, trembling as she pulled her shawl tighter. Henry smiled politely, but the unease lingered. On the night of the event, Henry drove through the winding roads leading out of town. Trees hung low over the asphalt like they were trying to keep something in. The mansion revealed itself gradually, its silhouette emerging behind a veil of mist, lit only by the pale silver glow of the moon. He wasn't alone. Several other cars were parked on the gravel driveway, their owners stepping out in lavish costumes and gilded masks. No one spoke. It was oddly formal, almost reverent. The moment he stepped through the doors, the scent of old wood and wax filled his lungs. The mansion was alive. Candlelight flickered across marble floors, and a soft waltz echoed from a gramophone in the next room. The grandeur was undeniable, but it carried a weight, an eeriness that sat heavy in the air, as if the building itself remembered too much. The guests moved like figures from another time. The eyes behind the masks lingered too long. Henry tried making small talk with a woman in a red feathered mask, but her responses were clipped, almost rehearsed. Something was off. He could feel it in the stiffness of their smiles, the way no one seemed to blink. There was no mention of a host, and no signs of modernity, no phones, no lights other than candles. It was as though he had stepped out of time. At midnight, the music changed. A deeper, slower waltz began, less elegant, more somber. The chandeliers dimmed slightly, casting long shadows across the ballroom. That's when he saw it. A man in a bone-white mask standing completely still near the fireplace. Henry hadn't seen him enter. His costume was old-fashioned, moth-eaten, like something dug out of a grave. And the others, they began to move toward him as if pulled by invisible strings. The white masked man extended a hand, and one by one, guests joined him in the dance. Henry watched as their movements became erratic, desperate, like they weren't in control. Their limbs jerked in unnatural rhythms, their feet dragging across the polished floor like puppets on worn-out strings. He backed away, bumping into a tall figure who didn't flinch. A voice, low and wet, whispered, "Once you dance, you don't leave." Henry spun around, but no one was there, only the echo of that grotesque waltz. He tried to speak to others, tried to make sense of what was happening, but no one acknowledged him. It was as though they had lost the ability to recognize reality. He tried to leave. He made it to the front door, but it was sealed. No lock, no handle. The windows wouldn't budge. Panic set in. He tore off his mask, hoping to snap out of whatever dream this was. That's when he noticed. The others weren't wearing masks anymore. Their faces, twisted, vacant, decayed. What he thought were masks were their actual faces, preserved in death-like expressions. Their eyes were hollow. Henry stumbled backward, trembling. One of the dancers, a man whose jaw hung unnaturally low, turned his head slowly toward him and said, "You accepted the invitation. Now you're part of the memory." The gramophone screeched, then went silent. The room froze. All heads turned to Henry. Their mouths opened in unison, but no sound came out. Instead, an oppressive silence fell, as if the very air had been sucked from the room. His heart pounded. He ran, the sound of his own breath deafening in the quiet. Running blindly down a hallway, Henry burst into a room lined with portraits. Every wall was covered, but these weren't painted centuries ago. They were modern. Faces he had just seen at the ball. The woman with the red mask, the man with the limp, and himself. There he was, mid-scream, painted in horrifying detail. His breath caught in his throat. He reached for the canvas, but the moment his fingers touched it, he was pulled violently backward. The white-masked man was there, inches from his face, but the mask was melting now, revealing blackened skin, teeth like broken glass. Henry tried to scream, but his voice was gone. A chilling whisper filled the air. "Now you see. Now you remember." The portraits began to bleed, red tears running down their faces. Behind them, the walls cracked open like dry earth, revealing endless corridors filled with other paintings. Thousands of them, maybe more, each bearing the likeness of someone who had once received that cursed black envelope. The mansion was quiet now. The music had stopped. The guests had vanished. Only Henry remained in the center of the ballroom, mask back on his face, arms limp at his sides, his eyes blank. If someone had entered the room then, they might have mistaken him for a statue, another decoration for the next masquerade. And somewhere, deep within the house, a new invitation was being written. The candlelight danced across the envelope, sealing the wax with the initials WM, waiting for the next curious soul who couldn't resist the call of mystery. Outside, the fog thickened. In town, no one mentioned the masquerade, but some had noticed Henry's absence. And Mrs. Dalloway, when asked, only muttered one thing: "Another one for the wall."